Ismail and I both do a lot of things, but one of the things that we do is we write about art. And this is sort of a paradigmatic thing of what we would call art critic today, is that it's not existing as a profession the way that it did maybe at the beginning or mid-century, when you could have like a salary job as an art critic for a newspaper or something like that. These days everyone's kind of wearing a lot of different kinds of hats. And the fact that we are all doing a lot of different things, maybe curating, researching, writing, organizing, whatever it is you want to call it, is also a bit reflective of how diffuse the field of art criticism is, and how difficult it is to kind of define it and pin it down and figure out what it does or what it's trying to do. And because of this very difficulty in defining whatever it is that art criticism does, since about 2000, 2001, right? I would say.
Yeah.
We've been having what everyone likes to call, because we live in an age of crisis, also crisis of art criticism, which is basically, also it's very hard to define what this crisis is, but all we know is that many different players are very unhappy with this genre of writing for a lot of different kinds of reasons. Chief amongst them being that there's sort of a lack of polemic, or there's a lack of a sort of a fear of making judgments in arts writing anymore. And then basically it's become something, that's a bit too domesticated and a bit too ephemeral or a bit too soft to serve any kind of purpose. And there's been many, many millions of roundtable panels and books and articles about this crisis. But one thing that's sort of interesting is how that the framework of this discourse hasn't really been housed in Cairo in that same kind of like programmatic institutional way, because no one's that I have encountered has been eager to sort of engage with the terms of this debate, because the first thing that we're usually complaining about is that in Cairo there is no art criticism anyway, that this is one of the huge things that's kind of hindering the art scene. It's a lack of a robust art critical discourse. Okay, does that transfer this file? So one of the things that I wanted to interrogate in this conversation is whether that's really true, because I don't really think it is, that there's a lack of any kind of robust critical discourse, but maybe it's maybe we're not reading it, and if we're not reading it, then why? That's also kind of interesting. And then I also wanted to sort of carefully look at, from what is being written, how we're trying to approach the artwork through words, and what is maybe not working about this anymore in the current moment and with the kind of art objects that now we're starting to deal with. And sort of ask the question, is it possible, or should we try, or should we just sort of not even try because no one's reading this stuff anyways, to develop a new language with which to try to address the art object. And I think that one of the best ways to kind of try to figure that out is to look at what kind of words are sort of reappearing and the kind of art criticism that's circulating that most of us are encountering, to try to more clearly understand what the stakes are for most writers, and then determine whether we align ourselves with those stakes or not. And now I'm going to briefly pause so that I can do some technical work. And I'll let Ismail briefly introduce what he's going to talk about, because I think one of the things that's really interesting is also to compare sort of the historical lineage of certain critical terms that we're encountering in Anglophone art criticism, which is obviously dominating the international art community, versus the lineage in Arabic and especially in Egypt.
Yes. So I'll actually talk in Arabic. مساء الخير. زي ما هي كانت بتقول، في احساس ضمن الناس المهتمه بشؤون الفنون النقد الفني عامة في العالم دلوقتي، وخصوصا العالم المتحدث بالإنجليزية أو بيكتب بالإنجليزية، إن في زي تمييع الخطاب النقدي. في كده نوع من الخوف أو من عدم الرغبة في إصدار أحكام أو اتخاذ مواقف واضحة أو مواقف نقدية صريحة مباشرة. وكانت فكرة أنيا إن إحنا نبص على السجالات والجدل حوالين المواقف دي، ازاي وصلنا ليها، ليه مش عايزين ناخد موقف، ليه في تمييع، ليه في تماهي معين مع الوصف اكتر من الحكم. وهي كانت مهتمه اكتر بالجزء اللي ليه دعوه بالنقد على مستوى يعني عالمي او عولمي. وفي نفس الوقت من ناحيتي انا كحد بيحاول يكتب بالعربي ساعات وبيفشل على حاجات كتير قوي، كان عندي فضول اشوف لو احنا بنبص على نوع الجدل اللي طرحه خطاب النقد عامة في العالم، هل ممكن ليه اصداء عندنا؟ طب ايه نوع القضايا او نوع الاطروحات اللي بيتم مناقشتها؟ نبص عليها ازاي؟ نلاقيها فين؟ في حاجات مثلا ليها صدى او ليها نقط تلاقي او لا، لان مثلا ممكن يكون السياق بتاعنا بيحكم حاجات معينه مش حاسين ان احنا المفروض نناقش نفس النقاشات او نتكلم عن نفس الحاجات. اللي انا هحاول اعمله مع انيا غير ان احنا هنتكلم عن طبعا المفردات والمصطلحات النقديه اللي هي بيتم تداولها بشكل عالمي او اعتيادي، هنتكلم برضو على بشكل طبعا مختزل جدا عن نوع السجالات او النقاشات اللي طرحها النقد باللغه العربيه في مصر، خصوصا فنون تشكيليه او بصريه. واحنا اخترنا 4 نصوص حاسين ان هي ممكن تكون علامات داله او نصوص داله عن نوع النقد ده. واحد من القرن ال19، واحد من اوائل القرن ال20، واحد من منتصف القرن ال20 او بعده بشويه، وواحد من اخر 10 سنين او 15 سنه. وهنحاول من خلال النصوص دي ان احنا نشوف ايه المصطلحات او الافكار اللي تم طرحها، وهل ممكن نقراها في ظل السياق او الاطروحه اللي انا اتكلمت عنها. اتمنى نكون احنا وصلنا للتكست بتاعي.
هنشوف.
something's happening.
But maybe some of you have seen this online. It's one of those things that people are putting on Facebook and stuff a lot if you're in the arts. And it's something that someone wrote. I don't even know who this person is, but it's sort of a schema for the healthy ingredients that you need, the good ingredients that you need to have healthy recipe for artscape, basically in any city. And it's sort of very obvious things like a lot of art schools, a good museum, active curators, a curious audience. And one of the big points that sort of comes up in different ways is that there must be arts writing. And there must be a lot of it, and it must be robust, and there must be a lot of platforms for it to be published, and there should be a curious reading culture as well. So I think it's sort of interesting that any of us who are working in this field somehow sort of take it very much for granted that art writing is like totally intrinsic to the functioning of an art scene. And I'm not really sure why we have that idea, because even if you have a lot of arts writing, I mean, no one's really reading it. So, I mean, how many people here read art reviews on a regular basis? On a regular basis, yes.
Fuad, I know you. I know you. You're my friend.
And I don't know if you guys are being shy, but I don't either. You know, and it's my job. And when I was actively curating, I mean, I would really just read reviews as part of my job, as part of research. They function as merely as that for me. I don't really go home at night and say, damn, I'd love to read a good art review. You know, it's been a long day. I'm sure it will be really interesting. So I'm kind of wondering why we think it's so important and why most of us don't really enjoy reading it. I mean, every once in a while you do come across a beautiful piece of writing, but usually it's a bit painful and it feels like a chore. And then no one really remembers it because it's also not accounted for in terms of art history. It's not a source that a scholar would use for the most part. So what's the purpose? You know, we'll return to that point later in the discussion, but for now, oh, I went too far. Okay. Can you see this painting?
You can
With the lights?
switch off the lights, or?
I think it's probably got a good enough idea. You don't really need to see the details here, but I wanted to just start with a small exercise. This is a painting by a woman called Lucy, who is a painter of romance in modern life, is what she says on her website. And she sells a lot. She's a very successful market painter. She's what we usually call a mall painter. She gets these things mass-produced and sells them in a lot of these shops in different malls and stuff in America. And so people who are decorating their living rooms and so on would buy something like this. And I wanted to hear if any of you, don't be shy, wanted to offer a very brief critique of this painting. What do you think about it? Good. It doesn't have to be anything. Leave the theory out of it. Like, what are your reactions to it?
It's like elevator music to me. It's just like it's the same category of like you can see it and you can listen to it and then it kind of disappears and I would never remember it.
So, would you mean like maybe boring?
That's what I mean.
I'm very interested to know what they're talking about.
Okay. So you're a little bit curious.
Yeah.
You would like more information?
I would like to know what they're probably talking about, something really deep and intimate.
The title of the painting, for context, is Modern Love in the Autumn.
What?
Modern Love in the Autumn.
I mean, the title is as generic as their black cigars.
Generic. Okay, we've got generic, boring, like more information.
So it's like McDonald's store.
So kind of like, so this kind of goes along with the generic stuff. Yeah.
Or mass-produced.
Yeah.
I think it's not that good, as people used to obtain at their houses paintings for Romeo and Juliet back from the Renaissance, when he used to sing for her. That.
So that you would like to have that as opposed to this. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, he would like to have this painting. Okay. Any other words you want to throw? And for those who gave us a couple words, if you had to, I'm guessing, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, that these are negative associations. The kind of stuff you were saying, you don't think this is good. Right? You think it's bad? Am I? Yes.
No, it's not bad.
Oh, you don't think it's okay?
I would be very careful to say something is good or bad.
I'm really glad you said that. This is a very important point that we will return to. Okay, so no one really wants to comment.
It just feels like it has no spirit, you know? Like, but I don't know what spirit means either, but it just feels like it's not to me.
Yeah.
And you also called her a mall artist, so that's good.
Oh yeah, I shouldn't have given
But I'm
you the
already
information at the
I'm
beginning.
curious on this thing.
Darn it, that was stupid. Okay, well, I'm not an anthropologist. I don't have to be so careful about how I deal with these subjects. So I'm playing it fast and loose. But what I'm sort of getting from you guys is that you're a little bit skeptical of this. You think it's a bit boring, a bit bland, which I am interpreting as a negative critique, but none of you wants to come out and say that this is a bad thing. Okay. You don't have to read the scary block of text, just the red, what's highlighted in red. Is this in focus? I don't have glasses on.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is one of those very small newspaper reviews. It's from the New York Times by Ken Johnson, who's one of their staff critics. And I don't know if you guys ever read the small reviews, but what is this even, 250 words or something? They publish them every day, like it's a very, very the guys have to go to these openings and write something for 250 words really fast, and then it gets published. And so basically, maybe you've already read this by now, but he's talking about what he calls in the beginning a provocatively puzzling exhibition. So that sounds really good, curious, interesting. He goes on to give a little bit of context in terms of what the exhibition's title and curatorial premise is referring to, these larger themes. Then he describes very, very quickly the artwork that was in the show, which all sounds pretty weird and evocative. So it seems like could be interesting. And then at the end he says, exactly what all this adds up to is hard to say, but it certainly provides rich fodder for philosophical reflection on art and object work. So if someone could tell me, please, what he thinks about this exhibition. I mean, this is, I don't think he should have been paid for this, basically. I mean, this is really paradigmatic of any kind of newspaper art criticism. This is what we're talking about, you know, when I mentioned this fear of making judgments, a criticism that has become anemic in terms of how it's just very descriptive and very tentative, but not taking a position. And yeah, he's not even venturing, he's being quite shy. So this is an extract from another kind of piece. This is from a long form piece from the New Yorker, which was written by the art critic, some of you may know him, Peter Shadov, who's sort of the art critic art people love to hate because he's a, how would you describe him?
Flamboyant, very sort of poetic, self-indulgent kind of writing that is low on theory and more like, you know,
conversation,
kind of,
visceral reactions and stuff like that. So those of us like who went to school for art or something like that, most of us were trained to appreciate art form type of art criticism, which has a lot of art history and theoretical terms and stuff. So we tend not to take them seriously. But he publishes regularly in the New Yorker, which is a very wide circulation print and online magazine that's very popular. So, I mean, he's reaching out to many more people than any kind of art forum critic or something like this, right? And what's interesting, so this was a profile he was doing about a sculptor, Rachel Harrison, as you can see, who he absolutely loves and thinks is just super awesome. And the piece goes on for a really long time, mostly just describing her work. But then he actually is quite strong in voicing his opinion. Right, this is the first paragraph. He's calling her perhaps one of the most important artists of the current moment. But what's interesting is to say the kind of words, see the words that he's using to explain why she's so important, because of her originality. Yeah, it's basically coming down to novelty and innovation. And I think the words that you guys were giving me that were a bit on the bad end of the spectrum were things like generic, boring, you've seen it a lot, whatever, which implies that there's a critique of it because it's not innovative, it's not doing something new. So I'm going to return to that shortly. And then this is like a third kind of art criticism that we would encounter a lot. This is actually from Art Forum. It's one of their picks, if you ever read those, you know, from different cities. I chose this one because it was in a show in Sharjah, so I thought we could be a little regional, still in the Anglophone context. And again, it seems to me a very positive review of this show, and again, it's interesting to see the words that the author is using to suggest, even though he or she doesn't actually say like this is excellent or not, but we can presume that it's a positive review because they are using words such as challenges, critiques, acutely responds, critically contends. So basically what they're saying is that this is a successful exhibition because it's arguing, it's putting something forward, it's challenging. And we tend to find, especially in a vehicle like Art Forum, even more so in something like October, which carries the legacy of an Art Forum language, it's a bit crunchy, Marxist, lefty. These are their critical valuation terms, like on the good end of the spectrum. It's things like challenge, fight, break, blah, 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 whatever. And basically what's interesting is that, we'll get there in a moment. In English language arts writing, and if you read any of a lot of the criticism here that's published in like Mas or Egypt Independent, Al-Ahram, whatever, the sort of main platforms that we all know. If it's very, very, very rare, again, for a writer to like really take a critical stance and trying to value the work or the show that they've seen. But when they do, I would say that most of us here, myself included, are prone to use this kind of language to explain why something is good or bad. It failed to challenge, or it challenged really successfully. It failed to argue, or it was super provocative. And what's interesting is that all of these kinds of words are actually coming from a pretty specific historical moment, which is the beginning of the 20th century, historical avant-garde, trauma of World War I, art scene kind of looks to their practice as something that, there's this need for like radical break or something like that. And that's when this language first starts appearing in our lexicon. And then it gets sort of revived again after like being derailed through formalism for a little bit. It gets revived again with conceptualism in the 70s and is still with us. So we're really bathing ourselves in these very, like a centuries-old critical terms, whether or not we're very cognizant of that fact. And sort of, this is one of the potential, what can we call, underlying cause, if you want to state it so strongly, of this so-called crisis, is that we're using a language that doesn't reflect the reality that we're living in anymore. And we're sort of staying very much in a past historical lens that we're not even aware of, to look at something that's really corresponding to another reality. And so my question is that maybe if we could find a way to break free, which is again sort of loaded, still a very historical avant-garde challenge, of this historical prism, but maybe we could turn our criticism into something more generative and more powerful, and maybe something that we would actually like to read. I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Yeah. You have. Just kidding. No.
Well, I'm not sure. I'll ask you guys. So I put these bullet points to kind of briefly summarize the Elkins text. Did anyone actually read it? Because I always assume no one read this stuff. You read it? Okay.
Wow.
You organized the evening. Well, but do you think we need to go through it, or should we just move on?
I think we can sort of move on, but sort of use the categories.
Yeah, okay, we can return to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was like the history of Anglophone art criticism of the early 21st century in 15 minutes, basically. So now for something slightly different. You can do the same for Arabic. And I'll put the beautiful painting back for us to look at.
Yes. So I'll talk briefly in Arabic and then summarize.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's fine. زي ما كانت وانيا بتقول، زي ما وريتنا أمثلة من نقد مكتوب باللغة الإنجليزية في مجالات مختلفة وفي سياقات مختلفة، وكانت بتحاول إن هي تشوف تتبع أصول المصطلحات دي. وطبعا مش هينفع أعيد كل اللي هي قالته بالتفصيل كلمة كلمة، بس يعني اللي ممكن نفهمه من ملخص الكلام إن معظم الكتابات دي فشلت إن هي توضح موقف معين، أو إن هي تقول العمل ده وحش عشان 1 2 3 4، أو كويس عشان 1 2 3 4. معظم اللي احنا الأمثلة اللي شفناها كلمت عن والله الأعمال الفنية بتوحي بكذا، أو بتلهم مثلا الموقف الفلاني، أو بتحسسنا بحاجة معينة. ولو احنا فكرنا شوية ليه الكتابة عاملة كده، أو ليه الكتابة طالعة بالأسلوب ده، هنلاقي إن هو ده ليه علاقة بحدث تاريخي معين، ألا وهو الحرب العالمية الأولى والثانية، وصعود الحركات الطليعية وانهيارها، وزي كده تطور حالة معينة من عدم الثقة في تعريف أو تحديد موقف معين. بمعنى إن تم النظر للعمل الفني على إنه ظاهرة بتخلق تجربة معينة. الحكم عليها ان هي حلوة او وحشة او كويسة او سيئة ان هي تخلينا نفكر، ان احنا ناخد موقف نقدي من حياتنا من الواقع بتاعنا، مش ان هي ملتزمة مثلا بخواص جمالية معينة، مش ان هي تتبع اسلوب معين، لا اطلاقا. بقى القياس ان هو حالة احنا نفكر ان احنا نعيد النظر في واقعة معينة او حقيقة معينة، وبالتالي التراكم الخبرات دي ادى ان دلوقتي معظم
نقاد
مش بس النقاد، يعني انواع النقد كلها تتكتب
كتاب
او البيس بتتكتب كلها دايما بتقول العمل ده او المعرض ده كويس عشان خاطر هو نجح ان هو يثير التساؤل الفلاني، او هو فشل لانه ما خلناش نفكر في حاجه الاعلانيه او وده بس المقياس نوعا ما بقاش المقياس ان والله مثلا ان الجماليات المستخدمه كذا، او العمل ده مثلا ممكن نقراه في سياق تاريخي من التراكم الفني مثلا بشكل او باخر. الحاجه اللي انا كنت عايز اكمل على اللي انا كنت بتقوله هو نقطه السياق التاريخي وعلاقته بالنقد، وخصوصا اللغه العربيه او نقد اللغه العربيه وخصوصا في مصر. مقدمه بسيطه، الفنون التشكيليه في مصر بدات كنوع من زي منحه من الخديوي. اول مره اتعمل 1870 في قصر الخديوي، كان عباره عن لوحات رسمها الاجانب المقيمين، وانا خلال ان شاء الله الندوه هقعد اقرا شويه من النقد او الكتابه اللي كانت وقتها. وفضل الفن التشكيلي او البلاستيك ارتس، النحت، الرسم بالزيت الى خصيصا خصائص الطبقه العليا الارستقراطيه، الخديوي، اسرته، الوزراء، طبقه الملاك الاراضي والى اخره، لحد ما تم انشاء مدرسه الفنون الجميله 1917 وتم تخريج اول دفعه من المصريين الاجانب اللي درسوا الفنون الجميله. في اللحظه دي بالذات ولحد مثلا منتصف العشرينات بدات محاولات الكتابه عن الفنون التشكيليه او الجميله في مصر بالفرنسيه، وده كان لغه الادب او لغه الثقافه وقتها. فنلاقي معظم الناس حتى اول عميد مصري لكليه الفنون الجميله محمد ناجي كتب باللغه الفرنسيه في غرفه بكاء، وتم اعتبار ان هو فن نيش او يعني خاص بطبقه معينه، وان لسه في مراحل بداياته او تطوره، فما فيش داعي او فيش ضغط ان احنا نكتب بالعربي. تكاد تكون اول محاوله للكتابه بالعربي لما جه الناقد احمد راسم، هو ابو النقد الفني في مصر، وحاول يكتب عن الاعمال الموجوده في جيله هو، راغب عيان، محمود مختار، جيل الرواد، وكتب اول دراسه احاديه الموضوع عن الفنانه ايمي النمر سنه 35، وانا برضو هقرا منها حاجات. طريقه كتابه احمد راسم سنه 35 ممكن لو قارناها بالسياق العالمي او السياق الدولي بتاع الكتابه هنلاحظ ان هي كلاسيكيه جدا، متاثره بالفنون الجميله بتاعت فرنسا، متاثره بالجوانب الشكليه اكتر اللي هو الاسلوب، التقنيات، الجماليات بتاعت التظليل، الالوان، الاشكال، الكلام ده كله، ويكاد يكون في بس كده يعني شرح عابر قوي او تعليق عابر قوي عن الموضوع. وده هيفضل السمه الرئيسيه للنقد في مصر باللغه العربيه لحد مثلا الاربعينات لما تظهر الحركات الطبيعيه زي جماعه الفن والحريه. للاسف انا ما كنتش بدوس ليها، بس اللي مهتم يعرف ممكن ابعته يعني اللينكات. النص اللي انا خدته بعد احمد راسم هو كان نص بتاع نبيل هي اتباعت للناس اللي كانت عايزه تقراه. وده برضه يورينا يعني كده شيفت في طريقه الكتابه ليها علاقه بسياق ما بعد الاستقلال، وزي كده ادلجت الكتابه عن الفن. واللي اخترت النص ده لان انا حسيت ان هو ده الجدل اللي احتل الصداره في فهم الفن والكتابه عنه لحد مثلا الثمانينات. جدل المجتمع الاشتراكي دور الفنان ان هو ينمي الوعي وان هو يحارب القوى الاستعماريه الغاشمه والقوى الخفيه والقوى الخارجيه والكلام ده كله. المصطلحات اللي احنا بنسمعها بشكل او باخر من الناس اللي بتشتغل في سياق اللي هو الثقافه او قطاع الفنون والتشكيله اللي هو الدوله. اخر نص اخترته نص كتبه الدكتور خالد البغدادي في كتاب نشره من سنتين، هو فصل عن القضايا المعاصره في النقد. وده النص اللي ممكن يكون فيه زي كده صدى لاشكاليات اتكلمت عنها عنيا، وهي اشكاليات ليها دعوه احنا محتاجين نقد اكتر، احنا محتاجين نقد يكون فعلا بيشترك مع العمل الفني، احنا محتاجين نقد يكون تجاوز فكره الاستهلاك. طبعا والقضايا اللي هي معانا من الاول خالص فكره الاصاله والمعاصره، واحنا يكون الفن اصيل يعبر عن هويتنا، البعد الهويتي اللي هو مش عايز يفرقنا ده. ده بشكل او باخر
الاطار العام.
ايه؟
الاطار العام.
يعني ممكن اهم سجالات او كده يعني قضايا تم طرحها من خلال 4 نصوص دول. طبعا ده يعني اختزال مخل، بس انا كنت عايز بس ادي الناس فكره ايه نوع الحاجات اللي اتطرحت من قبل الكاتبين المصريين يعني. Just to wrap up, I was saying that I was basically rephrasing what you said about the 3 different texts and what they sort of do and the sort of fear of judgment and why they sort of recede in the background, and just talk about the evocative experience of the work or